Good evening, everyone. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to Indigenous Australians present. I would also like to recognize that Indigenous people have been custodians of the lands and waterways of Australia for more than 65,000 years and our first teachers and educators. Furthermore, I acknowledge the place of Indigenous knowledges in the Academy. As we transition from dry season into eel season in March, we acknowledge that Wurundjeri people's long-standing relationships with and care for the lands and waterways on which the Faculty of Education and the University of Melbourne now stands. And can I add, there is a waterway underneath this faculty, and there are eels in it as well. So I learned that during orientation week today. So welcome. We are about to be involved in a very special and, I would say, provocative conversation that promises to be an exchange of ideas from active war zones in Ukraine and Europe to our unique context here in Melbourne and overall in Australia. So firstly, I need to convey that tonight's lecture will discuss themes such as war, experiences of trauma, and may include other confronting themes. This lecture may not be suitable for all people, and so I encourage you to engage with it with care. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Visiting Scholars lecture tonight, University Without Walls, Wellbeing Lessons from Active War Zones. The Faculty of Education is absolutely delighted and thrilled to collaborate with Future Campus to bring this very special event to you this evening. I would like to acknowledge Tim Winkler, Director of Future Campus, who extended an invitation to collaborate with us in January. He has nurtured an extremely meaningful relationship with Professor Yana Sичikova and Professor Igor Lyman, and written in depth about their experiences and also fundraised for their travel and efforts in Ukraine. He's also responsible for funding their safe exit from Ukraine to Poland, to Canberra, all the way to be with us tonight here at the University of Melbourne. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim. We are very pleased to be collaborating with you. I would also like to take the opportunity now to also acknowledge our esteemed guest sitting here in the front row, Emerita Professor Kwon Lee Dao, AOAM, whose name is on this very building. As many of you will know, Kwon is a distinguished scholar who has served as a Dean of Education for 20 years here and also as a Vice-Chancellor at the University of Melbourne. It's wonderful to have you here tonight, and can I just also recognize that it's 60 years this year since you started to teach here. So now about tonight's lecture. I'm really excited about this event tonight, and we'll provide a very quick overview of the event and how it will run. First up, Yana and Igor will share critical insights into well-being, resilience, and higher educational leadership drawn from sustaining a Ukrainian university during occupation, displacement, and ongoing conflict. Following Yana and Igor's presentations, our Faculty of Education experts, Associate Professor Tom Branzel, Associate Professor Catherine McClellan, Professor Nikki Ricard, will join Yana and Igor on stage, where Dr. Rachel Kohler will facilitate a robust conversation while our experts exchange ideas inspired by this visiting lecture. Tom, Catherine, and Nikki will provide a case study in response to Yana and Igor's presentation, followed by a discussion of lessons learned from active war zones, Australia, and the whole global context. We aim to have time for audience participation with Q&A, facilitated by Rachel and Tim from Future Campus, so thank you both for doing that. And our wonderful Professor Liz McKinley, our Deputy Dean, will be delivering tonight's vote of thanks. So we are very lucky enough to start this evening with an eagerly anticipated presentation from Yana and Igor, and I would now like to take a few moments to tell you about their influential and amazing career up to date. Professor Yana Sичikova is a Vice-Rector for Research at Berdyansk State Pedagogical University. As secretary of the Presidium of the Council of Vice-Rectors for Research of Ukraine, she actively advocates for national support of displaced institutions. Her research in material science focuses on dually used technologies, while her broader academic interests include meta-science, scholarly communication, and the ethics of AI use. She has also conducted social research on the experiences of scholars forced to leave their homes since the full-scale invasion in 2022. Professor Igor Lyman is coordinator of international relations and head of the Department of History and Philosophy from Berdyansk State Pedagogical University. For more than 30 years, Igor has been studying the regional history of southern Ukraine during the Russian Empire, including the history of Crimea and Donbass. He launched the book series History of Foreign Consulates in southern Ukraine, where already 5 books have been published. Currently, Igor is working on the issues of recording the destroyed research infrastructure of Ukraine and the initiative Ukrainian Science Diaspora. Both Yana and Igor's work is in sustaining education and community under conditions of war challenges us to reconsider what a university is and what it must become in times of profound crises. During the early weeks of the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and I think it's exactly 4 years this week since it happened, classes, meetings, and semesters collapsed entirely. As survival, access to food, electricity, information, and safety became the urgent concern. Together, Yana and Igor have coordinated distributed teaching, safeguarding staff and students, and maintained continuity of research, showing that leadership under war is not only about survival, but also about sustaining purpose, creativity, and intellectual productivity. Over the past 4 years, despite displacement from their original buildings, they and their teams have produced research at the same or even greater level than ever operating from the campus. Based on this research across 40 displaced universities and their lived experience of leading without physical campuses, they argue that well-being is not an adjunct to educational continuity, but the central organizing principle that enables teaching, research, and community life to endure under extreme conditions. Translating now this to our context, we're looking at how universities can support students, staff, and communities through uncertainty, disruption, and rapid change. This event is an invitation to rethink well-being beyond the traditional campus boundaries and to consider resilience, solidarity, and collective responsibility as central to institutional leadership. The idea of university without walls carries a profound resonance for me, less as a metaphor and more sort of as a lived memory. I recall stories from my parents and their friends from Prague who were not allowed to study at the university during communism in Central Europe, and thus they gathered in secret apartments, private gardens, and parish halls for self-organized underground university seminars. These clandestine gatherings offered more than philosophical education. They embodied courage, solidarity, and the refusal to allow institutional borders of authoritarian systems to dictate what counts as knowledge and who can speak it. Reimagining a university without walls, then, is not merely about dissolving those physical boundaries. It's about reclaiming the university as an ethical and intellectual commons, as a space where curiosity, dissent, and care can really thrive. And on that note, I'm truly delighted to welcome Professor Yana Sичikova, Professor Igor Lyman, and Tim Winkler to the stage to commence our conversations today on University Without Walls, Wellbeing Lessons from Active War Zones. Please welcome.
Thank you very much, Marek, and to the faculty for hosting this occasion, and thank you to you all for showing such interest in what is an amazing story. Now, this has been an incredible week. Yana and Igor are professors and scholars of remarkable capability and agility, but in the relative safety of our community and campus, it's sometimes difficult to get a point of reference on just what they're doing and how that works. It's not a distant war story. They arrived in Australia on Friday, they return tomorrow. It's a story for today. So I wanted to open with the image of this wooden spoon. It's easy to get caught up in our TV perceptions of Ukraine. But when we talked last year, Yana told me a story about she was trying to decide if she would buy another wooden spoon. She's been out of her home for 4 years, and it's a question of, she's got many wooden spoons at home. Does she buy another one? Will she return home tomorrow? Will she return home ever? The wooden spoon is a symbol of that decision, that challenge, that complication in life. So there's been 14 years of war since Russia invaded Crimea and southern Ukraine. And then subsequently, 4 years since invasion occurred. It's a long time to go, not knowing whether you're going to go home or where your home is. But despite that, they're running a university in safe area, relatively safe area. When I say safe, Yana will be able to describe what safe really means, 30 kilometres from the front line of an active war zone, but still relative freedom. There's no campus, no homes, no research archive. There's little money, and air raids up to 12 times per day in Kiev, where Igor lives. There's students studying on the front line. There's students studying in secret in occupied areas where it's illegal to study at a Ukrainian university. And there's students and staff scattered around the world. But despite that, they've achieved all this in 4 years. So this is a complicated story where they have gone through so much but achieved so much. And they're defined not by their dispossession and displacement, but rather by who they are today. Who they are tomorrow is a more complex question, and perhaps one that no one can answer right now, but who they are today is an extraordinary achievement in that context. Igor I wanted to start with you. You're the ultimate poster child, I would call you, for studying history. Now, it's 4 years tomorrow that forces rolled into your home city of Berdyansk, but you left beforehand. Can you tell us why?
In reality, to be truly the vast majority of Berdyansk inhabitants didn't believe that Russian will start invasion in 2022. The vast majority believe that even if they start, it will be only on Donbas region and it means Donetsk and Luhansk region. But when in the evening of February 21, me and my wife watched online speech of Putin about so-called recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk people republics. 1 hour speech, where only 3 last minutes were exactly about recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk people republics. But 57 minutes in reality about not recognition of Ukraine as a state. We as historians understand that next step will be invasion. Because in the past, we had already several times, almost the same in our history. That's why early in the next morning, we put just 2 luggages, our American Cocker Spaniel Matilda, and computer of our teenager son, And the three went from Berdyansk to Zaporizhia. Distance just 200 kilometers. Distance which under normal conditions can be passed during 3 hours. When we were on the road, only our car was alone. But 2 days later, all this road was full of cars. And later, when Yana left Berdyansk, people,
the next bit of the story.
Yana will tell you about not 3 hours. So wait for her story.
Thanks, Igor. So Yana stayed under occupation. The Russian authorities arrested the people who were in charge of the local institutions. The other people who were in charge of the Berdyansk State Pedagogical University left, and Yana was the one remaining person. She was living for 3 months under occupation, and for the last month, she was hunted by the Russian authorities and had to hide in safe houses. It was eventually obvious they had to leave. So when you left, how did that journey go, Yana?
The road of Berdyansk to Zaporizhia during the war often called the road of the road of life, because not all can finish this road. This is very dangerous. But then you are finished, you feel freedom. You can listen your language, Ukrainian language, and you can speak your language, and you can brief. I'm sorry, my English very. And our way was 2 days. This is
so 2 days to travel 200 kilometers?
Yes, but this is very...
How many checkpoints?
More than 20. And in all checkpoints, this was the full проверка.
Check.
Yes.
But it's Russian checkpoints, so
yes,
that you understand. Occupiers checkpoints.
Yes. And filter people, not all выпускают.
So not everybody got through. It was
yes,
big
yes.
filtering process at every checkpoint.
Yes, and we went into mines road and
mines beside the road as well as shelling in the distance, like bombs.
Yes, and
not mines to interrupt communication by the roads where there are no checkpoints. So mines which put but Russian occupiers. So it was very dangerous, and every minute car with Yana could be destroyed.
Yes, and this is thousands of cars. And these cars may stop 2 weeks or 20 days without food and without water. We went with our cat, and he ледь выжив. Yes.
Right, but it was by surprise. So
Yes.
He had all the chances to die.
Yes. This is very terrible memory for us, for all Ukrainian peoples who displaced.
Thanks very much for sharing. Now, I won't take up more time now. We could talk for days about your experiences. but what we're now going to see is your presentation on how things are moving forward and what you've observed and insights from Ukraine. So thank you for coming all this way, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank the university and the faculty, the Professor Marek Tezar and the Future Campus and Tim Winkler for the innovation and for the opportunity to speak today. And I would also like to apologize my English. It is not my working language, so I will read sometimes not very well. I'm sorry. In this presentation, I will share some results from our research on the mental health and well-being of academic staff in Ukrainian universities during the war. And I will also outline several lessons that, in our view, may be relevant for Australian universities. Allow me to say a few words about our university. Until 2022, Berdyansk State Pedagogical University was located in the coastal city of Berdyansk, on the shores of the Azov Sea. Its institutional model was territorially grounded, a campus-based structure with centralized governance and in-person teaching. Academic activity combined teacher education, humanities, and selected research direction. Daily coordination relied on special proximity. Offices, lectures halls, faculty meetings, informal interaction, and in February 2022, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. Shortly thereafter, the city of Berdyansk was occupied. The university lost physical access to its campus. Tomorrow marks 4 years since the occupation of our city. The initial period was marked by profound uncertainty. The university faced a strategic choice: suspend operation, dissolve, or relocate. We chose the relocation to Zaporizhia. Relocation does not mean transferring infrastructure. The leaderships left to occupied territory and secured legal recognition from Ministry of Education and Science. No laboratories, no archives or equipments were moved. Everything remained under occupation. The university was re-established without material continuity. This is how we became that we now call the university without walls. But it is important to clarify that relocation means in practicals. Zaporizhia lies approximately 15 kilometers from the front line. The city is subject to daily missile attacks. Under such condition, concentration the entire academic community in one location would have reproduced vulnerability rather than reduced it. For this reason, we chose a different model. Faculty members and students were not required to gather in Zaporizhia. As a result, our academic community became geographically dispersed across Ukraine and across the world. We are not isolated case. Across Ukraine, more than 40 universities have been displaced. On this slide, you can see a map from our joint research project with Professor Igor Lyman. In this study, we sought to document the scale, geography, and trajectories of institutional displacement within the Ukrainian higher education system. What appears here is not an exception, but a systemic reconfiguration of a national university landscape. University without walls does not mean a purely digital university. Although most of our teaching now takes place online, our institutional life is not confined to screens. We gather regularly in different cities across Ukraine for public lecture, science festivals, academic retreats, summer schools, and community events. These meetings are temporary, but they are real. They restore presence, rebuild trust, and sustain academic culture. Dispersion did not eliminate community. It changed the way community is organized. Also, more than 30 of Ukrainian universities have been displaced. Few have framed this situation conceptually. Berdyansk State Pedagogical University adopts the term university without walls, not as branding, but to name an institutional condition. This leads to a broader question. What does it mean for a university to become post-tutorial? Traditional universities has been understood as territorially anchored institution. First the building, then the community within them. But displacement disrupted this sequence. To think through this transformation, a question we recently discussed at the conference in Canberra, we found it helpful to distinguish between two dimensions. In German philosophy, one differentiates between Körper, the body we have, and the lab, the living body we are. For a university, Körper consists of infrastructure, building, laboratories, equipment, and budgets. Lab recites its practices, teaching, inquiry, memory, trust, shared meaning. War stripped us of the institutional body we had, but it did not dissolve the living body we are. In this sense, the university does not disappear. It reconfigured. However, let's return to the realities. War did not replace the ordinary pressures of academic life. It laid itself on top of them. In Ukraine, academic structure stressors now coexist with daily air raid alerts, missile attacks, prolonged electricity outage, and the necessity to work in shelters. Academic labor continues, but under radically altered conditions. On this slide, you can see a typical electricity supply schedule. Power is available only at short intervals, often twice a day for limited periods. When electricity disappears, internet connectivity vanishes with it, and often water supply and heating as well. This winter temperature in Kiev are around -20 degrees Celsius or -30 degrees Celsius, and public heating points are being set up across the city. Such conditions transform stress from episodic to structural. Under such condition, question of well-being cannot be postponed. In universities are carried by people rather than buildings, then their psychological state becomes a structural factor of institutional survival. And together with my research team, we began to study the impact of war on the mental health of the academic staff in Ukrainian universities. We designed a three-wave study to examine burnout, anxiety, and depressive symptoms among academic staff during the war. I will first present the result related to anxiety levels. Using the GAD-7 scale, we found that 34% of academic staff reported severe anxiety. These levels are clinically significant and require professional support. Importantly, traditional academic factors such as age, job title, or even institutional relocation do not explain this pattern. The strongest predictor is forced displacement. Migration status is significantly associated with the high anxiety. One particularly striking finding concerned gender. Contrary to peacetime global patterns, male academics report higher levels of severe anxiety than women. This appears to be linked to several wartime specific pressures. First, many report a conflict between professional duties and social expectation to serve or to act as protectors of their families. Second, restricted mobility, including limitation of living as a country, increased feeling of loss or control over one's professional and personal future. Finally, some respondents describe a form of mobilization-related survivor's guilt, a moral tension between continuing academic work and the realities faced by those directly engaged in combat. Anxiety is strongly concentrated among those who consider leaving academia. In this subgroup, the constant intentions to leave, severe anxiety becomes the dominant profile. Statistically, the association between anxiety severity and intention to live is highly significant. This shows that anxiety is not background noise. It is closely linked to exit trajectories from academia. Let me now turn briefly to depressive symptoms. Using the PHQ-9-David scale, nearly 1/3 of academic staff reported moderate to severe depressive symptoms. Functional impairment was widespread and often exceeded the reported severity of depression itself. Gender and migration status emerged as significant predictors. Men reported higher depressive scores, while women experienced the greater functional impairment, suggesting different coping patterns under prolonged crisis. Importantly, staff from relocated university showed lower depression levels, indicating that institutional responsiveness may have a protective effect. And burnout, I'm sorry, I forgot the one slide. Burnout, we use the Maslach model. We define burnout through 3 components. The first is emotional exhaustion. This means feeling emotionally drained and constantly tired. The second component is depersonalization. This refers emotional distancing from work, student, and colleagues. And the third component is a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. This is when the work brings less meaning and fewer feelings on effectives. Across 3 waves, burnout does not stabilize, is escalated. High emotional exhaustion rising from about half to nearly 70%. Exhaustion shift from reaction to background condition. Depersonalization follows the same trajectory, from 1/3 to almost 60%. Distancing protects in the short term, but erode engagement and professional meaning. Professional accomplishment appears more stable, yet sustained performance becomes psychologically more costly. Burnout during the war is not evenly distributed. Migration is a strong accelerator. Gender patterns are complex. We often say we have adapted, but adaptation impairs recovery and stability. When we observe is habituation to chronic overload, universities appear functional, teaching continues, research continues. Yet emotional numbing increased, engagement decreases, and refusal of excessive workload becomes morally difficult. Under such condition, individual coping is not enough. Structural decisions are required. Resilience can't buy time, but it cannot replace support. According to our data, almost everyone agrees that mental health support is important. However, when we look at real conditions inside universities, the picture changes. Many staff describe the institutional culture as weak, programs as missing or ineffective, and access to support as limited. The gap between expectation and reality is critical. In long-term crisis, people cannot rely on personal resilience alone. We tested not only whether support exists, but whether is actually change carry intentions. Accessibility matters. When support is easy to reach, people are less likely to think about leaving academia. Institutional culture matters even more. Feeling that mental health is taken seriously reduced exist intentions by almost 9%. The most surprising result concerning types of support. Self-help practices, simple, flexible, and autonomous, turn out to be the most effective. Traditional solutions such as counseling or mobile apps did not show a significant effect. This suggests the people need support that gives them control, no additional bureaucracy. Saying that mental health is important is not enough. And now, I would like to step back from the data and reflect on what the Ukrainian experience can teach us. There are not lessons about war alone. There are lessons about how universities function under prolonged uncertainty. The first lesson from the Ukrainian experience is what vulnerability in crisis does not look the same as a peacetime. Our data show patterns that would be considered atypical under normal conditions. For example, we observe again gender paradox, shifting roles, and different psychological costs for different groups. This tells us that universities cannot rely on fixed assumptions about who is at risk. The second lesson is about what we call temporary life. In Ukraine, migration initially reduced stress because it increased physical safety, but over time it became a source of exhaustion. Temporary housing, temporary contracts, temporary plans. When this lasts too long, it undermines the sense of control and professional future. The key point is simple. Status uncertainty itself a mental health risk. The third lesson is about very dangerous illusion, the illusion of stability. In Ukraine, universities continue to function. Courses are taught, papers are published, grants are managed. From the outside, the system looks resilient, but inside, emotional exhaustion and depersonalization steadily increase. This creates what we call silent loss. People stay in our jobs, but they withdraw from collegial life. This kind of loss is difficult to see, but it is extremely costly for universities. The fourth lesson is closely related. A strong sense of mission does not protect people from burnout. In our data, many academics continue working because they feel responsible for students, institutions, and the future. This commitment helps them persist, but it also has now exhausted they are. Mission and values are important, but they cannot compensate the chronic overload. Universities can look resilience while quality exhaustion their people. The next set of lessons concerns mental health support itself. Our data show a clear gap between awareness and reality. Most academic staff agree that mental health support is important. However, many describe institutional support as hard to access, ineffective, and unsafe to use. This tells us that having programs on paper is not enough. Support must be trusted, easy to read, and free from stigma. Another important finding is that simple support often works better than complex services. In crisis situation, people prefer support that is quick, flexible, and under their control. Finally, poor support can be worse than no support. Community protect better than infrastructure. Universities that kept teams connect and shares purpose alive shores, lower levels of severe exhaustion even after losing buildings. Workload is central. Well-being depends on how work is organized. Asking individuals to rest does not help in the system continues to demand the impossible. Clear priorities and conscious stop-doing decisions are formed to real support. Well-being also requires governance. It should be monitored regularly. Universities can reduce harm only if well-being is treated as a structural responsibility, not an individual issue. And you may reasonably ask, why did I not speak about students? The answer is simple, because the student dimensions is even more complex, and this requires a much longer conversation. For this reason, I would now like to invite Professor Igor Lyman to briefly reflect on these perspectives to lead us forward the central lesson, imagine that the experience of Ukrainian universities. Please.
Thank you, Yana. Really, in Ukraine, we officially proclaim already many years so-called student centrism. You know what does it mean, but it's mean not only proclamation, it's true. A student and all students is and are the main persons in university, in our university. Professors are working for students. Not students exist so that professors can earn money for living. But it's really important. Our university not huge, not large, just 5,000 students. And today on interview on ABC broadcast, reporter asked us about how many students was before invasion, how many students we have now. The majority of Ukrainian university during these 4 years of invasion have one trajectory. Every year, less and less students because of immigration, because of many other reasons. In our university, we had 5,000 students before full-scale invasion and around 5,000 now. But geography changed dramatically. We worked as regional university. University for our Zaporizhia region. Now we have students from all regions of Ukraine and from abroad. Ukrainians from diaspora, Ukrainian who left Ukraine, and on the Ukrainian territories under occupation. Why I told about this? How it's connected with students' centrism. If you have just 1,000 students in the university, professors know each person. We work from the distance, mainly, but we work in close connections with each student. Every week we have groups, students in groups. Groups not like in US, in many other states. What does it mean? In many other countries, groups can be new for every subject. In Ukraine, we have a group which start from the beginning, and this group exists during 4 years of bachelor study or 1.5 years during master study. So people know each other, and each group has own tutor or supervisor from professors who communicate every day with all representatives of this group. And students from this group from all over the world can, in reality, 24 hours, because some of them in US, 7 hours minus, etc., etc. And it's exhausted for professors. But we do this because we understand that, again, it's not just good words. We feel, our university, professors and staff, feel and call themselves like big university family. It's not just for studying. It's also for, in reality, it's for surviving. Especially for people who are under occupation. To study in Ukrainian university, if you are under occupation, in reality, very dangerous. Because for occupier, it's very important so that people start to study in Russian higher educational institution. It's ideological propaganda questions. That's why these students who is under occupation study in a secret. We understand that we have many minuses in our you know that in each country there is competition among universities, rankings, etc. One of the rankings is openness. It's easy to check via website. But to protect our students and professors who are under occupation, we don't put information about them, about event with them on our website. We lose in our ranking, but it was these things because lives of people much more important. And about this slide, students are not only learning during war, they are building their future inside war. Our students are not a monolith group. You can see in the first table just several types of our students. Internally displaced students who are not in Berdyansk but in Ukraine. At others, among our students, we have many men who now fight for Ukraine, etc., etc. In the second column, you can see rethinking inclusion. New vulnerable groups also you can see on the screen. I will not continue this because I understand timing. So, next slide and last of the slide, very conceptual, not picture. Here is our, where is it? He is our rector, by the way. That's why it's important picture. It's a joke. This picture conceptual, not because of this. Let me conclude with a central lesson from the Ukrainian experience. A university isn't its buildings. Many Ukrainian universities lost campuses, laboratories and libraries, yet they did not disappear. They survived because their people remained connected. At the same time, our data show something equally important. When people burn out, universities don't collapse dramatically, but they erode quietly. If we want universities to remain resilient in war, pandemics, climate disruption, or political pressure, we must protect people, not only infrastructure. Well-being is not an individual concern. It's an institutional responsibility. In the end, universities are not walls. They are people. Thank you for your attention.
How to find the words to thank you, Yana and Igor, on behalf of everyone here tonight. I think we best do that by honouring it with just a moment of silence and just allow what has just been shared to sink. I know it's literally sinking into my bones, and I imagine that there is many resonances around the room as we're in awe of what you've shared with us. Awe, heartache, and extraordinary hope. I'm going to fall over chairs as I do that. So let's just take a moment. My name is Rachel Collar, and I have the extraordinary privilege tonight and honour to be facilitating a panel with both Igor and Yana, as well as 3 of our extraordinary academics in our faculty. And this panel is not about comparative suffering. This panel is not about, oh, and this is what it looks like here. This panel is an opportunity to share in dialogue difference, to share the power of research, the power of applied research, and importantly, the power of dialogue between institutions. And I think you spoke about it so beautifully, the core purpose of what a university is and what a university can be. And so it now gives me enormous pleasure to welcome back Igor and Yana, if you would come and join us. And I'm also going to welcome up our 3 panellists, Associate Professor Catherine McClellan, who is Enterprise Fellow for the Assessment and Evaluation Research Centre. Welcome, Catherine. I'm also going to welcome Tom Brunzell, Associate Professor in Trauma-Informed Education, and Professor Nikki Rickard, who is the Research Director of the Centre for Wellbeing Science and also leads our Digital Wellbeing Community Hub. So thank you so much. So let me give you a little bit of an overview of how we're going to run this element of our program. We're going to give our esteemed guests a moment just to sit and be after sharing that extraordinary research and experience, lived experience and story with all of us. And I'm going to invite each of our panellists to respond in kind. We're going to share elements of their research, a case study that can allow us to sit in conversation with the material that's been shared tonight. And then we're going to, having had each person share, we'll open up a conversation between all of our panellists. At the conclusion of that, we'll then open up to the broader room to join us in that conversation. So, Catherine, I'm going to begin with you. I'm going to begin with something that really struck me that you said, Yana, that was so powerful, that a university is a living body, but those elements might change. It may no longer be buildings, but rather it is the connection of the people that sit there, that bring that together in a unified way. And Igor, I thought, spoke beautifully about student centrality in that and about the really important capabilities that are needed for the future, not just the moment. Do you want to share a little bit of your case study and your response? to their insights.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone for the opportunity and privilege to be here. I am going to talk a little bit about a study that we conducted in the Ukraine prior to my joining the university, although we are hoping to go back. This was a study funded by the LEGO Foundation, and it was conducted while I still worked at ACER with my wonderful team, Rachel Parker, Amy Berry, Kelly Picker, and our in-country contact, Oksana Zablotna. She is the president of the Ukrainian Educational Research Association, and they were our on-the-ground staff for this, and they were remarkable, and we were so fortunate to work with them. So this was a 4-year intervention study where we were training teachers, and the target of this, through the LEGO Foundation, was their conception of learning through play. Playful learning is part of the new Ukrainian school policy, and so we thought that Ukraine would be a wonderful place to conduct this study. We may not have timed it perfectly. So we started the study in 2019, and the intention was to deliver 4 cycles of professional learning for the teachers to learn how to incorporate learning through play and playful learning into their context, into their practice, and into their classrooms. Obviously, 2019 was not an ideal year for lack of disruption, since lack of disruption, it started immediately with COVID. So many things moved online, but nonetheless, we persisted with that particular cycle of work and dealt with the lockdowns, dealt with the online replanning, everything else that we had to do, thanks to the team. They were really incredible. So we replanned the study once, moved forward, and we'd gone through the first 3 cycles of professional learning. We'd done the baseline data collection. We got to 2022, and then another intervention happened in this particular study. Obviously, the full-scale invasion in 2022 started. That was before the 4th cycle of professional learning for the teachers and the final data collection. We had tended to assume that at that point, we would abandon the study, that possibly our participants had more important, more pressing things to worry about than the study that we were conducting. But they felt differently about it. They strongly encouraged us to persist when we were very anxious and ready to just abandon it and leave them, not to their fates, but to their higher priorities. We obviously wanted to stay connected with them. We cared deeply about them and loved them at this point and did not want to see this happen to them. But we figured this was probably not the most important thing they were doing. And so for their own well-being, we thought we will just let this go. They didn't want that. They pushed us to continue. And we did. So we replanned the study again. This was a really flexible study. It went great. But the teachers were very clear with us. They wanted that bridge to the future. They wanted that idea that there was something out there that was worth investing in, that this would end, that things would change, and that the investment they were making out of their hearts and souls and practice with these children would in fact pay off in a future that would be different than their present. That was really what they wanted, and we were more than happy to support them in any way that we could to make that happen. So they brought us forward into this. The teachers worked incredibly hard during this period of time. They were teaching in years 1, 2, and 3. These are children who are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. So obviously a very different context than Igor and Yana were dealing with, but not wildly different findings. That belief that teachers could make a difference, that education was a community, that it was a group, and that well-being mattered. So we were very fortunate. We did not lose any participants in the actual study, although I believe we lost nearly every physical facility to either damage or complete destruction. The learning shifted online. It shifted underground. It shifted into bomb shelters. It shifted into all the places where children could be, and could be with their educators and with their team. I will say, as the responsible officer at the company I was working at, I had to sign off on all the safety protocols and procedures. I have never signed a more terrifying set than this one. We had to hire a specialized company to help us build a safety protocol about what to do if someone got shot, what to do if there was an air raid, how do you find the closest bomb shelter, all these sorts of things I'd never thought about. As an education researcher, fortunately, we are not often required to think about those things, but in this study we were. It was really sort of terrifying, and I hope I never have to sign another protocol like that in my life. But remarkably enough, the program successfully delivered 2 years' worth of professional learning to those teachers. Those 30 teachers committed, and they made it through all 20 online modules. It was remarkable. They gained the foundational knowledge they needed to implement learning through play in their practices. And we were able to build a continuum, looking at differences as they progressed from acquiring foundational knowledge about learning through play, deepening their practice as they move forward, and at the highest level, transferring their knowledge to new context. And I will say, despite starting at notably lower levels of socioeconomic status and support and skills on both of the measures that we had in literacy and in social emotional skills, the intervention schools grew more. All the students grew. We were very fortunate in that. So the magnitude of the growth was large even in the control schools. It was over a 4-year period. Children are going to grow and develop. That's normal. But it was extremely large in the intervention schools. So we had a larger growth, even though they started farther behind as a result of this study, showing that the learning through play practices really did make a difference in the lives of the children and in the lives of the teachers. One of the most interesting findings in the study was that when they started, we asked about barriers and enablers to this kind of practice. And when they started, the barrier they saw was the children. They saw children as not ready to do this, didn't have the skills, weren't ready, weren't emotionally prepared to collaborate and solve problems and be creative in their own ways. So first they were going to learn how to do school, sit quietly, sit in rows, listen to me, do what I say, all the things that we think of as the classic grammar of schooling. They'll do that first, and then we'll let them play. That attitude during the period of this study was probably the most remarkable shift we saw, because by the end, what they saw as the biggest enabler was the children. Their joy, their learning, their belief in their own capabilities, their development of problem solving and community and capability, the richness of their learning. So they moved from seeing children as a barrier to children as the enabler, as the reason, as the engine that drove all of this forward. We were very unfortunate. So in the end, I'd just like to say the joy of the community that they were able to build, of seeing their children go from being a problem to being the enabler, to being the competent and capable partners in constructing and developing their own learning and knowledge, was the most remarkable shift we've ever seen. And we are hoping to go back and confirm that they have been able to continue going into the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And it was so wonderful to hear around that central purpose that was driving those educators to put the students at the centre. And yet I know in some of the dialogue that we've had, both with Yana and Igor and also in preparation for this, that many of those teachers also commented about the strain that that took on them and how important it was to be able to support their own well-being in order to facilitate the development of social and emotional skills for young children. And that certainly came through in your conversation tonight, Yana and Igor. And Tom, I know that your work in this space is phenomenal in terms of understanding the significant impact of trauma on individuals. And Yana, you made such a poignant point that resilience cannot sit at the individual level alone, that we need to be able to look at that community structure. And Tom, I think your case study is a great example of how we can actually do that.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Yana. Thank you, Igor. This evening, I'd like to share a case study research we did in a community that I won't name, but many of us in this room as Victorians would know this community. It's about an hour from here. And this community sits in the bottom quartile for disadvantage markers, including economic inequity, educational pathway inequity, and family violence and relational trauma. That's often indicated by involvement with child protection and out-of-home care services. You can imagine that this community wanted to learn a trauma-informed, strengths-based approach. And we had an extraordinary privilege to work with every single campus in the community, from the 2 early years centers to the 2 primary schools and the secondary college. The secondary college in particular was one of those places that had had 4 leaders in 3 years. And the leader who signed us up said, I know that my staff does not trust this community because they desperately want to serve within the community, but by that he meant the community of the campus. And so we initiated in 2019 a trauma-informed way of learning. And it's important to really land that tonight, to say that our version of trauma-informed practice for schools is around learning, and to ensure that learning progression is the focus of what students do each day and what teachers see as their work. And so over that 2019, we shared strategies. And Yana, I want to thank you for what you said this evening. You said, it's about the body we have. And in trauma-informed education, we think a lot about the fact that many of us in teacher education, we're not trained to remember that we have a body, that we've been trained to do intervention, differentiation, we've trained to do pedagogical design. But the reminder that we have a body, it reminds us that stress resides in the body, often non-verbally. It's something that we may be able to talk about, but not something that we can immediately feel within ourselves unless we know a little bit more. And so over that first year, we talked about strategies for de-escalation, centering your body, understanding regulation and co-regulation as a function of a community itself. And then we talked about relationships that are founded in attachment principles, attunement, and what I would say unconditional positive regard for the learner. Through this strategy, we thought, okay, we're doing pretty well. And then 2020 happened. So we lost a bit of the physical space. And a couple findings happened through 2021 to 2022. Two findings I want to share tonight that totally shocked us. Number one, it turned out communication got stronger between the teaching staff on campus and parents and carers in the community, measured by numbers of communication messages, the willingness of parents and carers to say, you know what, the people on my campus are people that I trust. And so the teachers just kept reporting again and again to us, we have more communication and that communication feels authentic. The second thing I want to share is that we measure collective teacher efficacy and that notion that together we can share values toward equity and achievement only by working together through that shared value set. And you can imagine when we took baseline measure, frankly, the CTE, the collective teacher efficacy, was in single digits. Through 2020, through 2021, by 2022, it was in the high 80s. And we think a lot about the attribution of that. And the leaders said this was because the teachers realized they had more than a physical body. And again, I want to take it back to something you said to us earlier. You said it's the body we live. And so when I think a lot about things we can see, there's also things that we cannot see until we understand or take the conscious time to ground ourselves and realize there's more than what we can touch or what we can feel. And in our work, we now label that something we call the collective interior. That if we attend to our physical selves, reminding ourselves of our body and the things we can do, this notion of a collective interior, we might call that culture, or the ways that we interact both verbally and non-verbally, the connections that exist between us, and that's something that's leading our research moving forward. So I just want to say thank you for your instigation tonight.
Tom, what an exceptional story of resilience and adaptation as part of that. And what really strikes me as I listen to you is both the importance of the body and the connection, but what is also emerging in this conversation is the flip side of that, of what happens when we have displacement and the significant trauma that you spoke about in your research that was a significant marker or predicator, if you like, of anxiety and depression was that displacement. And the other thing that really struck me in your stories was the importance of autonomy and the choice to be able to engage in ways of support that really work for the individual. And I know that, Nikki, so much of your work has been incredibly powerful in that space in terms of your methodology, but also the incredible learnings that you've had of working with young people who have felt their own sense of displacement. And we'd love to hear a bit more about your case tonight.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And thank you, Yana and Igor, for sharing your experiences from Ukraine. And I'm hoping that I can transfer some of that to Australian universities to understand how students think about belonging. So I'm going to focus on belonging today. I'd love to talk more about mental health because so many of the things you shared really resonate as well. We're really fortunate in Australia that we aren't living in a war zone. However, we know that a lot of students are experiencing significant social isolation and a lot of barriers to social connection. This is even more heightened for significant groups or subgroups of students, particularly historically marginalised students, those from underserved communities like rural, remote, regional students, LGBTQI students, neurodivergent students are at heightened risk of mental health concerns, but also feeling like they don't belong at universities. One of the things that really struck me about hearing about the Ukraine experience, the extraordinary experiences there, is that in the absence of a physical campus, they were still able to co-create a new place for students and staff to belong. And that was very, very powerful for me. The way you described it as being people-based, relational, involving care and compassion, trust was mentioned a lot, and safe. These things all resonated to me, even though in a very different context, we see similar resonances here. And I'd like to describe some research that we've done in the Centre for Wellbeing Science here in the Faculty of Education. And we use a lot of co-design methodologies with young people, university students, but also other young emerging adults. We use participatory design methods and hackathons, trying to get young people to express what they think belonging means to them and what's important for them in understanding belonging. I'm going to share two quick takeaways, lots more I could share, but the first one that I really think resonates here is that belonging now lives in a hybrid space. And we saw examples of that, and Yana spoke very eloquently about it not just being online, you know, that there was lots of examples of people coming together and being a community both physically and online when necessary. And I think in a lot of our discussions with young people, it became very clear that students are living in this hybrid place, and they actually wanted to. When we talked to them about what it was about each of those spaces, it was very clear that there were a lot of positive outcomes. For a lot of students, particularly those from more marginalised groups, often there was a much more inclusive space in that online place, and sometimes there was a lot more access to what they needed, whether it was mental health services or groups that were like them, or social opportunities. It was so they could actually access more of what they wanted. So I think that told us to stop thinking about these online spaces as necessarily a negative thing. And we're so used to doing that, thinking about online spaces as a barrier to social connection, whereas there are also many opportunities for, if thoughtfully created, those virtual worlds can actually be a positive space and can also be a reconnection to try to meet students where they are and perhaps reconnect them with in-person connections as well when they're ready. And sometimes they're not ready, so they need to keep belonging in the virtual world. The second key take-home I want to give is that universities need to co-design these spaces with students. We often assume a lot about what students are thinking, but we really need to get them involved right at the beginning and ask them what they value in both aspects of their hybrid space. And we often get very surprised in our groups. One of the things that really struck me about some of our students, when they talked about designing digital tools and what would it be good for? Is it good for anything, or do we just want to learn and be in the real world? They had a real craving to use digital tools to help them curate the overwhelm of information that they felt they were experiencing every day. We talked a lot about social events, social opportunities, and they said they'd love to participate more, but often they felt disempowered because there was just too much happening in this complex world, and it was getting more complex every day. So we talked about using things like AI tools to curate, refine, personalise, deliver stuff that's actually relevant for them, is appropriate for their diversity, for their social readiness, and to reduce that overwhelm into something that they felt was manageable and actually empowered them to take the next steps that they might not have otherwise taken. So I guess the take-home message for me is for universities to be resilient. We need to be willing to redefine what universities are as places of connection, and we also need to be willing to adapt what that means when needed, whether it's wartime, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's climate change, whether it's terrorism. Things are changing. We need to be willing to adapt and make sure that people are always at the centre of what we do in universities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki, and indeed thank you to all of our panellists. I am really cognizant of time and ensuring that we do finish on time, but given the extraordinary opportunity to have you two amazing scholars with us tonight, I just want to, Tim, am I allowed to sneak just a couple of minutes?
Go for it.
Okay. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to those cases in terms of what that means in your context, or indeed if you would like to ask a question of our panellists, then the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for, it was X-prompt plus experience and your case studies is great because you can imagine Ukraine is situated on the distance 15,000 kilometers from Australia. We have winter now in Kyiv, in Ukraine. Here is summer. You live on the other side of globe, but you can see, and it's very important, many points where our Ukrainian experience can be compared with your experience. You can see where our war and our living in condition of war, not only surviving by our progress, etc., can be useful in your peaceful conditions. And we discussed previously, it's secret for others, but now it's not a secret, that after today's meeting, we can continue this discussion, not only discussion, but cooperation. So it's not a question, but it's a remark, and we appreciate this. We appreciate that in Australia, you understand importance of Ukrainian case. Thank you.
May I
Let's switch.
demonstrate to sound? May? I have 1 minute to prepare, and yes.
Yana is always very innovative and informal. That's
Innovative, and I am sorry for this.
I
No,
just
there's no apology.
feel in pause. So try to find. I will continue speaking about Yana. While she trying to find, I would like to. No.
She's found.
Okay, she found. Great.
I have this sound, one of the sound. Yeah. This is sound of beginning our morning, our education day before the war. And now our sound another. Yes.
You can hear the siren. That is the replacement of the bell.
Yes. And я бажаю. I wish your university, yes, only the sound. University, this is not only about walls, only about people, and this is our soundscape. And your university, only this and only смех.
Laugh.
Laugh, yes. This is my present for you faculty. Yes. This is about our university. No, not about. Yes, I have many. I'm today Santa Claus. Igor, help me describe this.
We call it a runner, like a table.
Yeah.
Yes, and this is traditional ornament. Yes. Yes. And the main, our Ukrainian flag. And some about.
You take that. Thank you so much. And I know that you will be itching in your seats that means that we have potentially run out of time for your questions. As we said, we could sit here for hours and learn together from these extraordinary scholars and the opportunity for us to be in dialogue with one another. But before I turn over to our closing comments, I just want to really again acknowledge Tim and Future Campus and everything that you have done to provide this opportunity for us. It truly is exceptional, and you were going to co-host question and answer, so let me ask if there's any final comments you'd like to make, Tim.
No, I think there has been a wonderful discussion. I'm not sure if my microphone is on. It's been a wonderful discussion. I thank you all for your patience. The opportunity for not just hearing from Yana and Igor and the insights, but also from what is happening here in Australia and how they intersect is profound and valuable two-way dialogue, which shows the importance of this type of occasion. So thank you for all your attention and for the opportunity to come here.
And without any further ado, I'm now going to ask our Deputy Dean, Professor Liz McKinley, to come up and provide some closing comments.
Thanks, Rachel. I try to keep it short for people. What we've heard tonight is extraordinary, and I feel very privileged to be able to make, giving a vote of thanks to our guests in particular, as well as our colleagues as well, but to our guests from the Ukraine. And I want to focus in on them. You've given us so much to think about and so much to talk about, and I can't possibly cover it all. So I just want to focus in on really what I've thought in terms of educational leadership. Leadership in times of crises. That's what you've shown us tonight. That's what we've heard here tonight. To run from tanks, to weave through enemy lines, and to evade arrest by Russian authorities are not the usual tasks on an academic's to-do list, at least not what I've ever written here in Australia. The academic literature about leadership in times of crises, and we do know a little bit down here. I come from New Zealand, you might be able to tell by the flat accent, fairly broad still. And we have a lot of natural disasters in New Zealand, so we have actually experienced some of those sorts of things, but nothing like you are experiencing. And I know Tom's teams that he works with are still doing work in Christchurch 15 years after the earthquake that killed 180 people and got rid of half the town. It just fell about and people got displaced out of their homes. But they didn't always shift from Christchurch. They did get displaced out of the city as well. But many of them had to leave their homes because the water and the silt came up through the earth. And they actually underwent 2 big earthquakes and 12,000 little aftershocks. So we have a lot of those sorts of natural disasters, including some volcanoes. But, I guess one of the things when you read in the literature, I did do a little bit of homework around this, and I went looking in the literature. One of the things that you do read in the literature, I guess, is that there's a lot of work about what people should do if a crisis should occur. And then there's the literature of the lived experience, the people like yourselves who have actually lived through it and can tell us about the day-to-day work. We've heard some amazing stories here tonight about how societies can emerge from the debris, I think, of war with positivity and hope and a lot of effort, notwithstanding the challenges you actually meet. We know that the literature tells us that crisis leadership entails identifying emerging threats, instigating efforts to mitigate them and deal with the consequences, and once the acute crisis period has passed, re-establishing a sense of normalcy. But what happens if the crisis period never passes? What happens when you can clearly identify the threats but can't do anything about them? What happens when what you used to know, that which was normal, never returns? And I think about the wooden spoon, about whether you ever get back to your kitchen and find the rest of the wooden spoons, the story that Tim was talking about, because I did read Tim's article online before I came. And I wonder, you know, if I lost the utensils out of my kitchen, I would lose some relationships as well. I know this sounds funny, there's a lot of men here that probably don't understand this, but I have kitchen utensils that came from my mother, for example, who has now passed on. And they're good, because they're better than the ones you can get now, right? So, you know, you lose that sort of break as well, even in something as small as a kitchen utensil. So what do you build if normal never returns? What do you build from? What do you need to establish a new normal and a way forward for your community? And I think tonight we have heard that there was much to build on when the walls have tumbled down. We have before us two academics who have done just that. Our guests, Yana and Igor, have shown extraordinary bravery and boldness to be with us today. And I wish to thank them wholeheartedly for sharing their journey with us. Over and above the personal feats of courage is their fearless persistence to pursue hope for their students and the wider community, as well as for your country. And in doing so, finding core principles that will hold the community together. They are the principles, as the Dean mentioned in his introduction, built on strong relationships and on a collective based on care and well-being. You bring personal dispositions to your position, your leadership positions, I believe. You have personal qualities where your experiences, values, beliefs and skills, you know, in the situation that requires developing trust. You need to be able to do that. Respect, decisiveness, calmness in times of anxiety, visibility, accessibility, being focused, having vision, committed, confident, positive and strong. And the list could go on in terms of the personal qualities that you have shown us tonight about what you and your students bring to the challenges that you face. You bring strong relational orientation where leaders offer unifying vision. You'd offered a vision to your community, really important. You developed a sense of community in your organisation and amongst your community and enabled prudent decision-making in crisis. The basis is building strong and trusting relationships, as you have mentioned, and fostering collaboration amongst your people. The last factor, I think, is how a leader assesses things in situations as they unfold. You talked about being adaptable. Sometimes you have to change. Sometimes the answers are not always obvious. But in terms of being in context and knowing the context, I think you understand the cultural sensitivities, the decisions and the timeliness that they need to be made. Igor was a great example of not everybody has your history to know to leave the day before the Russians came, if you know what I mean. So making timely decisions, adapting to changing needs, really important. And most of all, making use of the resources you've got at hand. Yeah, these are all really important, I think. And what we heard those sorts of things that were important to provide direction, be flexible, think creatively, yeah, and constantly reappraise what options you've got that in front. So we have heard tonight from leaders who are bold, courageous, risk takers. None of us know how we will respond until it happens. A university without walls challenges us all, but it is a story of hope, I believe. The deeds and decisions of everyday life are often forgotten as the media focuses in on aggressions, bombs, raids, and the like. As I read in a recent article, what does it mean to have autonomy over your future in a time of invasion? In a time of war, when you fear for your life and those of your loved ones and your community. But also what we have learned tonight is that this is not just about one university, it's about a lot of universities across Ukraine. I think, Yana, you said 40 universities you were doing your research in, something like that, 40 displaced universities in the Ukraine. The argument forwarded tonight of putting wellbeing and resilience at the centre of any university, with or without walls, is a way of sustaining any university during these times of crises. And I broaden that out to the times that the case studies that have been given by our own academics here. There are lessons for all of us in these critical times. Our panel of Faculty of Education colleagues have given us some idea of some of the work that has been carried out here at the faculty and have started to explore the implications of the work being done under the conditions of trying to manage crisis. Before I close, I'd just like to thank Tim and Future Campus for working with us to bring this rich presentation and discussion with us. And now I invite the Dean back to present our guests with a token of our appreciation.
So it's my great pleasure to end this event, and what a fantastic, amazing intellectual and emotional evening this was. Can I just say, apart from the wonderful conversation that we had here, I have to say before, when we met today, I learned that your university, your displaced university, is on the beach. And this week was the first time in 4 years that you've seen beach when you went here to Victoria. I know it must have been very emotional, and I want to recognize that this is a very special stay for you, and we're very grateful for you that you came here. With this, we conclude our event tonight, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events. Thank you everyone for coming, and good night.